Rain World is without a doubt the most unique game I've ever played, and yet I can't fully recommend it. The experience this game provides is unlike anything else, but sadly frustration is also a part of this experience. To understand where this frustration comes from, I first have to explain the basic concept of Rain World. You control this cute creature called a slughead through this depressing industrial looking world filled with pipes and dead machinery. In place of this technology is now an ecosystem, filled with various plants and animals which are in a constant balance of predator and prey. Even if you are close to the bottom of this food chain, and your predators seem like an unstoppable force, there will always be a force greater than them, one which they are afraid of, and so should you. A different game might take a concept like this and still fit the environment around the player, giving them enough tools and instructions to overcome it despite all odds, but not Rain World. It almost feels like the player character is just an afterthought, like the developers just focused on the art direction and level design to create this beautiful world, until one of them pointed out, aren't we forgetting something? In reality this isn't the case. The game can still be beaten by anyone with enough patience, but it still constantly manages to make you think, I should not be here, and some people will end up not wanting to be here. I however found myself being drawn to this world, and was excited to uncover its mysteries, the immense difficulty only adding to the feeling of discovering things that are not meant for you. I hope that what I've said so far hasn't put you off, and you still consider buying the game. Steam has a no questions asked refund policy, so long as you request a refund within 14 days of the purchase and have played for less than 2 hours. But please check for yourself. Policies might change in the future. The game isn't front loaded, and it gets a lot more intense the longer you play, but a 2-hour time frame is enough to make your decision if you want to keep playing or not, in my opinion. Close the video and play Rain World if you haven't already. The gameplay you've seen so far was only from the first area for the sake of avoiding spoilers. There will certainly be some things later in the game that are worth discussing once you return. But I can wait. A one-of-a-kind experience can't. Okay, so let's talk about difficulty. And just like any self-respecting person that talks about video games, I have to compare it to Dark Souls. But don't worry, I won't say that Rain World is the Dark Souls of platformers. I'll just use it to highlight a key difference in how these two games handle difficulty. You see, in Dark Souls the act of getting good at the game is very intuitive. It doesn't matter if you're looking at your first playthrough or your 6th, you're still interacting with the same core gameplay mechanics. You're still dodging, blocking and attacking. You're still looking for an opening in the enemy's attack pattern to punish them. What has changed is your skill in recognizing these patterns and timing your attacks. Rain World also has ways to increase your skill, but it's the act of getting there where I see a big difference between the two. Dark Souls teaches you its mechanics in the tutorial, and getting better at the game becomes very logical from that point on. You just play it more. In Rain World your playtime can only go so far in increasing your skill, because the game is actually hiding many mechanics from you. You might discover most of them in one playthrough, but you could also play through the entire game without finding a single one. They aren't needed to complete the game, they just make it a lot easier. So I will go over what the game's tutorial covers and what it doesn't. It starts off by showing you your keybinds, but it only does this if you pick one of the default input presets. If you change your keybinds in the settings, then the game assumes you already know all of them and doesn't show them again at the start, which is fair. But when it tells you in universe what button to press, it still assumes the default controls, so you might start off the game by going in and out of the settings a lot. However, it's not too frustrating. There aren't that many buttons to memorize. The game teaches you that you are hungry, and how you can eat bat flies and blue fruit. You need 4 pips worth of food in order to hibernate. Any additional pips will be stored for later. You need to hibernate to escape the rain, and can only do so in one of the many shelters which serve as checkpoints. It doesn't tell you what any of this on the hibernation screen means. You learn how to pick up and throw items, and lastly get taught how to leap a gap by going down to a crawling position and holding down the jump key. And that's it. You get told to go explore and to avoid predators. So here are all the things Slughead can actually do, and aren't told to you by the game. There's quite a lot, so you can skip to this timestamp if you already know them. You can swap 2 items in your hands by double tapping the grab key. This is a very important thing to learn early, because it can mean the difference between trying to kill a predator or trying to feed it. You can store an item by holding grab and then spit it back out by holding grab again. You can drop an item by pressing down and grab. Crawling backwards in a tunnel slows you down, so you can press jump plus the direction you want to go to readjust your position. You can dash inside the tunnel by pressing jump. This will slow you down in a straight tunnel, but can be used to quickly fall down a tunnel or launch yourself out of one. Dashing at the corner of a tunnel will give you the speed boost without a slowdown afterwards. Slughead can perform a backflip by walking in one direction and then quickly turning around plus jumping. You can throw down a spear during the flip by pressing down and throw without holding left or right. This can be very useful in combat, or to get the spear stuck in the ground to serve as a pole. Slughead can slide on its belly by pressing down and jump while walking in a direction. A jump during the belly slide will add even more reach. The backflip can also be performed during the belly slide. Throwing a spear during the slide will allow you to stab the mouth of enemies like lizards, which would otherwise be protected from the throw. The spear can also be thrown the other way, which will speed up your slide. You can do a wall jump if 2 walls are close enough to each other. Holding down during a fall will cause your Slughead to flop around, which can be turned into a long jump. Throwing an item during the jump in the direction you are going will let you jump further. Bunny hopping will allow you to keep some of your speed from your previous action. The same thing also works on poles. Turning underwater will give you some speed, so you can wiggle Slughead to swim faster. Pressing jump inside water will give you a big boost, but it also uses up a considerable amount of air, which can cause you to drown if it's not used carefully. That was a lot to go through, and these are just the things to do with movement. There's still so much to learn about the uses of items you can find, the behaviors of creatures in the world, and the different regions of the world can also have their own set of rules and challenges. So why is it that none of this is told to you? I believe that the developers had a very specific vision of what the player should feel like while playing Rainworld. They should learn to think like an animal, to observe the environment and then adapt to it. The fact that the game is so full of hidden mechanics means that you will likely stumble upon some of them by accident, and then stop to think, what did I just do? Leading you to try and replicate it, and then experimenting with this newfound skill to test your capabilities, much like a newborn animal would. A simple text box wouldn't give you the same experience, but that doesn't mean that this way is without its flaws. The current controls on a standard controller leave a couple of buttons without use, and I can't help but feel that having more actions bound to their own button would help new players a lot. The belly slide and backflip come to mind, because of their many uses and how they can lead to further moves after inputting them. The current controls do have some logic to them, however. The action you perform mimics your input in a way, that's probably why they stuck with it. The level design continues this trend of letting the player figure it out on their own. The game allows you to stumble into certain areas at a point where it's very unlikely that you can beat them. For many players this will be the Shaded Citadel and its almost complete darkness. The oppressive atmosphere in this region helps to elevate the experience of feeling like a scared little animal. But looking at a black screen and trying to feel out the jumps and dangers in this area isn't exactly what I'd call fun gameplay. It is reasonable to assume that a player would go into this area and the increasing darkness is enough of a warning sign for them to go nope. But it's also possible that the player does feel out the jumps in this area and arrives at a shelter, which sets the checkpoint in its place, and the act of getting out becomes an entirely new and frustrating challenge. I could see some people drop this game if they ever arrive at a point like this. Maybe having the guide display a picture of a slughead holding a lantern would prompt the player to first look for one before attempting to go through this area. Now I'd like to talk about my biggest complaint I have. One where I don't see the experience gaining anything and also providing gameplay that isn't fun. Unfair deaths. Most deaths in Rainworld can be avoided with enough skill and game knowledge. That's also why I feel more positively about the game's difficulty than negatively. Deaths might come sudden and are very punishing, but at least it's a learning experience and you can think about what you did wrong and what to do better next time. In cases like this, it's hard to find an answer to these questions, and this also has to do with the nature of the game. Enemies roam the world freely, just like you do, so the lesson to take from this cheap death can't be to just avoid this area, because more likely than not, the lizard won't be back on your second try. However, to keep things fair, I have to mention that this was the only cheap death I encountered in the 9-hour playthrough I recorded for this video. One very bad moment in the 9-hour experience seems like a decent ratio to me. 0 would be better, but 1 is acceptable. I do remember many more moments like this in my previous playthroughs, which have also been much longer, but I sadly haven't recorded them, so I leave it at this one death. Another point of frustration in this game is the karma level system, and the karma gates which separate each region. This is where the symbols on the hibernation screen come into play, and you are meant to figure out that they stand for numbers. Each time you hibernate, your karma level increases by 1, and each time you die it decreases by 1. The gates display a karma level you need in order to enter the region, and 1 needed to leave it again. The game is nice enough to flash your karma level in red if yours isn't high enough to cross the gate, but it still might be a stretch for the player to understand this whole system without words or numbers being used. Using numbers would make it understandable for pretty much everyone, because even after understanding the system, these symbols still just translate into numbers in your head. Oh, this gate needs 4 and I only have 2, let's go hibernate twice. There are story reasons for these symbols which also explain their name, karma level, and the design choice to use the story relevant symbol instead of the gameplay relevant one shows the developer's commitment in creating a fleshed out world first and then let the game happen in it. The karma level system has another issue on top of being obscure. It can also be a grind sometimes. The fact that you are locked out of story progression with a gate, combined with the fact that you lose 1 karma level when you die, plays a big role in why this game is so difficult. The game wants you to experiment to figure out its mechanics, but still has a very high penalty for dying, by slowing down your progress. You can often find yourself doing cycles of finding food to repeatedly hibernate in one shelter and hoping that you don't die in the process, just so you can get past the gate. The gates do become significantly less of an issue after a certain story event which affects the karma level system, but at that point you are pretty close to finishing the game. As a last point I will talk about the game's story along with the ending, and how it ties into the experience of Rainworld. The game starts off with a cutscene that shows you how a family of slughead hunts and travels around with their younglings. One of the young ones gets highlighted as raindrops start to fall on it. The family tries to run, but they get separated by a thunderstorm. The tiny slughead falls into the depths and is now alone in an unfamiliar environment. The slughead we play as is now much older and is still trying to find its family, which serves as the main goal of the game. You will often dream about your family as you hibernate throughout the game. This yellow creature that helped you in the tutorial is called an Overseer and will give you some vague directions to go east of the world, during which it will sometimes show you an image that kinda looked like an alien to me. There are a couple of ways to reach the first story point, but all of them will meet in the region called Shoreline. You will often encounter this huge leviathan in the open waters of the region, which will give you some troubles in reaching your next destination. Once you made it past that, you arrive in a big flooded building complex filled with technology that still seems to be somewhat functional. At the furthest point you can reach, you will find what the Overseer wanted you to discover. You meet a blue humanoid creature that is fixated to the wall by a mechanical arm. It speaks in a language you can't understand and otherwise can't interact much with you. The one action that does trigger a response you can understand is grabbing one of the things that fly around, which will make the creature violently shake its head. At this point of the story you have two options. One of them is eating the flying thing. But let's assume Slughead is a good boy and leaves it alone. You will have a dream of your visit the next time you hibernate, and will gain the achievement A New Friend. Now the Overseer will give you a new direction to go, marked with the symbol of the flying thing you didn't eat. This time it will take you upward, and inside this megastructure. I have to mention that this part is the absolute highlight of Rainworld to me. Ascending this impossibly large machine as a comparatively tiny creature, which has absolutely no way of understanding what this thing could be used for, is such an interesting concept, and it's executed perfectly. No matter which way you go, the structure just keeps increasing in size and it becomes impossible to make out how big it actually would be from the outside. The sound design also does its job. The constant electricity running through the machine and the thunderstorm going on outside really help to set this area apart from all the others in the game. It also isn't just for show. The rain which used to pressure you in other regions is now replaced by the thunderstorm hitting the structure. And electrocuting you. You will find a grappling worm inside this area, which adds another form of movement and is needed to progress in some parts of the structure. The platforming aspect of the game also gets very intense thanks to it, because you'll be grappling onto the underhang of the megastructure, while these monstrosities try to grab you with their tentacle arms. There are a couple of ways to progress in this area, and depending on which one you find, this could be the most difficult part of the whole game. The hardest path has a very fitting name. At some point the gravity inside the structure will start to lower, and you will be high enough for the rain and thunder to not reach you anymore. The music starts to build up as you're floating higher into the structure. Until you finally find what you were looking for. You meet another humanoid creature, but this one seems to be in a much better state. It again speaks in this incomprehensible language and shows you pictures that are even more confusing. You are then pulled up and given a mark, which will finally allow you to understand them. He tells you that he knows what you are looking for, a way out of this endless cycle. He knows this because every living creature shares the same goal. It is his task to solve this problem, but he hasn't found an absolute solution, and the situation keeps getting worse. However, there is a solution which helps you alone, and that is to go to the far west and then down into the ground. The mark we received will help us. He tells us to go, and that we should please take the other exit this time, because it doesn't involve us floating around in his memory erase. You will find 5 murals on your way out, each of them featuring one of the karma symbols. Finally, outside the gigantic structure, you will be greeted by another amazing sight. A very depressing city made up of countless buildings stacked on top of each other. Once you are back inside, you will notice that there's a strange aura in this place, and will find a black being with golden scales over its body floating above you. It will speak to you and tell you that your attunement is now much closer to theirs thanks to the mark you received. The struggle and the cycles can now all fade. They have found a way. You are then reset back to your last shelter. You now have to climb down the side of the structure and begin your journey to the west, but not before taking in the view of the rain clouds which have caused you so much trouble. I feel like this is a good point to clear some things up and give my interpretation of the story, while Slugcat is making their way to the last story point. The thing we encountered is called an Echo, a spiritual remnant of the race which used to live in this world. They housed in the city we saw and were the ones that created the two creatures we met, which are actually artificial intelligences called iterators. They were constructed to solve the great problem, the never-ending cycles of death and rebirth we are very familiar with. Nothing can truly die in this world, and so the ancient race wanted to find a way to escape the struggle. There was an old method of leaving this world, but it brought a huge risk with it, so it is the iterator's job to find an alternative. The process of calculating a possible solution takes a huge amount of water in order to cool off the megastructure the iterators are built into, and the resulting vapors then push back into the atmosphere, which created the rain. The world is now an even worse place to live in, and so the ancients started building the houses on top of the megastructures, where the rain couldn't reach them. As time went on, more and more of them became desperate in their effort of leaving this world, and decided to use the old method, disregarding the risk that comes with it as mere horror stories. They eventually all left, but still kept the iterators operational, since they can't die and therefore essentially have an infinite amount of time, meaning the chance of a solution ever being found is 100%. This eventual solution could then help the creatures still living in this world, and the iterators are instructed to guide them towards the old method until the alternative is found. This risk of the old method is best illustrated by explaining what the echoes are. They are the results of the method failing, as they are now stuck between the physical world and whatever comes after. Whether the solution fails or succeeds has to do with karma. The 5 karma levels each depict one of the natural urges of the ancient race. Fighting with each other, procreation, friendship and communication, gluttony, and survival. Those that didn't fully free themselves of these urges and still had their ego attached to something couldn't leave this world behind and are now stuck here as an echo. The mark we received from the iterator increased our maximum karma level from 5 to 10, which we will need in order to try the method ourselves. So we arrive at the spot mentioned by the iterator and descend deep into the earth, far below the reaches of the rain. We see the ancient temples of worship. And pass the symbol representing the highest possible karma level. We meet the guardians that still reside in this place. They only allow creatures with the highest karma level and speedrunners to pass. You descend deeper and deeper into the earth, and the screen starts to fill with this golden hue the further you go. Until you come across a lake of pure golden color. As you're diving into it, you will start to hear the music set in. I'll just let the next part play out for a bit. What is that thing? No matter where you look, you can't even make out where it begins or ends. It becomes a struggle to swim further down. The sheer velocity of this thing passing you keeps pushing you back up. Now that you made it past it, Slughead is left alone. But then the creature suddenly comes back and its head starts observing you. You're hooked up to one of its tentacles and are taken for a ride further down. The giant worm leaves you there and swims back up. Slughead is once again alone. But you will soon see other slugheads swimming with you. All of them going towards a bright light. Slughead is finally reunited with its family in the afterlife. This is what ties it all together for me. I don't think the ending would have had such a strong impact on me if it weren't for the struggles we faced. The developers made almost no compromises to their vision, and you not always having fun was a necessary risk for that. It is my belief that they wanted you to feel something close to resentment for this world. Thanks to that, the ending now has a bittersweet feeling to it, even if our Slughead ended up dying. I started the game with a love-hate relationship, but now it's only love. I still think that someone could enjoy this game even if they watch this video without playing the game like I told them not to do. Knowing how the journey ends certainly hasn't stopped me from going through it 3 more times.